my time here, it went by incredibly fast. Yeah.
Curt Melcher, the director of Oregon Fish and Wildlife,
So I was still in college when I started, but
is retiring this year after a decade at the head of the agency. And there are some things he's not going to miss.
I won't miss having to carry the second phone around with me all the time.
While Melcher might not be a household name, he's played an important role in a state that prides itself on its reverence for nature, its outdoorsiness, and its animals.
Well, I started in 1985 as a temporary employee, so...
March 31st will be Melcher's last day, and it comes nearly 40 years after he started with ODFW as a seasonal worker, doing stream surveys, sometimes even cleaning roadkill off the highways.
There's a lot of good things that we've done here.
So I sat down with him to ask how the agency has changed since the mid-'80s, what he sees as the biggest threats facing Oregon's wildlife, and what comes after the end of a 4-decade career.
Well, that's a long discussion. That's a 39-year discussion, but yeah, I did. I started with the agency as a temporary employee in 1985, August 1985, when I was still in college.
He was still going to the University of Oregon at the time, but as soon as he graduated with a degree in biology, the pull of field work brought him quickly back to the agency. He loved working in some of Oregon's wildest places, getting to see the beauty of the state from the ground and from the air. But he never dreamed he'd work his way to the director's office.
Well, I never set out to be the director. That was never my ambition. I had a good job that I enjoyed. I got to go do incredibly fun things all around the state, whether that's doing stream surveys or flying in helicopters or flying in fixed-wing aircraft doing surveys, boating on all types of waters around the state, from drift boats to power boats to ocean trips, and just really found it to be an incredible career and an incredible place to work.
The Department of Fish and Wildlife is a sprawling agency with more than 1,000 employees and a yearly budget of roughly $200 million. Now that he's occupied the top role in the agency for almost a decade, I asked him how he'd grade his performance.
You know, the stated mission of ODFW is to, quote, protect and enhance Oregon's fish and wildlife and their habitats for use and enjoyment by present and future generations. How do you think that the agency has done living up to that mission under your leadership?
Yeah, well, I think that's a broad mission, obviously. I'll just say that there's two aspects to that over which we have much more control, and that is over the fish and the wildlife themselves. We have the statutory authority to manage the take of fish and wildlife. We don't have the statutory authority to manage habitat, so we have to do that through partnerships with other landowners, private and or public landowners. I think given the pressures, on fish and wildlife as it relates to habitat, I think we're doing a good job. You can look at things like Oregon's position on the Columbia River hydropower system and things that we're doing to try and make things better for fish and fish populations. But then there's huge issues that we don't have control over. We don't have control.
ODFW can't control the weather or ocean conditions or things like drought. But Melcher pointed to some species he's especially proud to have overseen the recovery of.
Elk were once extirpated in Oregon. I could drive you right now, Cale. I could guarantee you I could take you to a place and show you elk. We have a lot of elk in Oregon. Similarly, bighorn sheep were extirpated in Oregon and in much of the West, and their populations have recovered. Waterfowl, classic example. Waterfowl populations have been bucking the trend of other bird populations. Waterfowl populations continue to thrive.
But in the world of wildlife, not everything has been a success story.
It's much more difficult when you talk about habitat issues and how you manage habitat to benefit fish and wildlife, because there is certainly competing interests as it relates to habitat.
And there's been some very real controversies Melcher has had to contend with. He's been the head of the agency as wolves have begun repopulating Oregon, and as endangered salmon runs have continued to decline. And that's often put him in a position where he has to make decisions that aren't going to sit well with a lot of people.
Yeah, it can be a challenge. Hopefully you have good relationships. So much about what we do is, we can have disagreements with other entities, whether they be livestock producers or wildlife advocates. We can have disagreements, but hopefully have a good relationship, so we can have those conversations and do them constructively. You gotta listen. You gotta have balance, and then sometimes you gotta make the call. And as a director or administrator, you got to be willing to make the decision. You can't in my opinion, you can't let some of these things languish. You just have to make a decision and be willing to deal with that.
Even when you know that there are going to be people who may be unhappy on both sides.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
But when I asked Melcher what he thought his biggest accomplishment was, it wasn't about wolves or salmon. It was about dollars and cents.
And we track our revenue regularly. We track our expenditures regularly. And in 2014, at one point, we had, after expenses, after payroll, we had $2.69 in our account. We have about $13 million per month operating budget. So to have $2.69 in your account at the end of the month is a bad place to be.
These days, the agency is carrying close to $60 million in cash reserves on a monthly basis. Melcher was able to right the financial ship by lobbying the legislature to raise fees for hunting tags and fishing licenses. He oversaw the purchase of their new headquarters, which saves them $500,000 per year over the building they leased previously. He eliminated close to 50 jobs without impacting services to the public, and he cut the agency's fleet by about 75 vehicles. That gives the agency more time to focus on its mission, protecting Oregon's wildlife, instead of its finances. And wildlife in Oregon is facing a daunting future.
You know, a lot of the folks that I talk to tend to see climate change and development as sort of the biggest threats to fish and wildlife. I'm wondering if you share that view, and if you don't, what you do see as the biggest threats facing Oregon's fish and wildlife.
No, I think whoever it is that's telling you that is spot on. I mean, we look at climate change and the impact it's having on our cold water fishes, but also our terrestrial wildlife, terrestrial animals. I think it's a huge challenge.
But climate change is not a standalone issue. It dovetails with development to create an environment where some species are struggling to survive.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressures, and the biggest pressures are going to be on water. And I think you see that play out, just around the state in terms of wells going dry and, lack of water availability for agriculture and municipal. And then
Melcher feels confident, though, that the agency is well positioned for whoever fills his seat next. I asked him what advice he'd give to the next director.
You got to be pragmatic. You need to have principles, but you also need to be pragmatic and recognize that you can't win every battle, and you got to decide when it's worth falling on your sword versus not.
And he stressed the importance of seeing ODFW as not a collection of 1,000 individuals, but as a unit where everyone has a role to play.
I view this agency as an Antarctic expedition where every team member is equally important to us achieving our mission. It doesn't matter whether you work in the mailroom, you work in accounts payable, you work in licensing, you work in a fish hatchery, or you're a chief scientist somewhere. Everybody is equally important to us achieving our mission.
So Cale's with me now. What an interesting conversation, and just the scale of change that he's seen over the years.
Yeah, I mean, he started in 1985. This was the same year that the Goonies came out in theaters. I mean, he said that their vehicle fleet included things like Darts and Gremlins and Pacers, and these are cars that maybe younger people today might not even know the names of.
Yeah, well, and also I get the sense that he's had to really be very good at negotiating to get the things that he needs.
He has. He kind of alluded to it there in the story that, ODFW does not have the authority to go out and get land, and that's very important for habitat conservation. So there might be situations where they know a species needs more habitat, they can't really go out and get it, and so they have to work with other state departments, landowners, whether that's state or federal. And he said that at one point, like way back in the day, these other places weren't even returning his calls, and today they have a very close working relationship.
Yeah, and it's great that he's brought him up so far, and I'm sure that, like some of our friends on the eastern side of the state love hunting. I grew up hunting, but then there's folks here in the cities who are like, maybe you shouldn't be killing those animals. So to still have a healthy, strong organization through that kind of turmoil is very impressive, I think.
Yeah, he's really, I think, brought it a long way from the days that he mentioned where they had just a few dollars left in their bank account. They make most of their money by selling hunting licenses and fishing licenses, and it's a very robust hunting community here in Oregon. And he said they've really tried to change the way that they do things so it's more friendly to hunters and fishers so they can go out there and do what they love.
Yeah, okay, fascinating. Thank you, Cale. Appreciate your story. Great stuff. And now we'd love to hear your thoughts on Cale's interview. What do you think about Oregon's Department of Fish and Wildlife, especially as it prepares to move forward with new leadership? Email us, will you? The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. Our number is 503-226-5090.